Parents, what lessons have you tried teaching your kids that completely backfired? When my oldest kid was 3 or 4, a few months after I separated from his mom, I found a home with a couple of these DJs who needed a roommate to split the bills. Mike was terminally ill, Louie was a pothead. I was a young divorced dad. Pretty suave home, am I right? One day, after cleaning the kitchen, I stepped out to pick up my kid. Came home and the kitchen's an effing wreck. Louie got so high and decided to make himself a smoothie. He left milk, ice, bits of juice, and just a lot of gross crud everywhere. I told Louie he needed to clean it up. He told me he'd get to it, but in a little bit. I told him I needed to make my kid dinner now and needed to work in the kitchen. He told me clean it up myself. One thing led to another, and pretty soon we're in each other's faces, really close, almost bumping chests, fingers pointing at each other, yelling really loud, lots of cuss words, etc., before we both storm off. I go to my room, and Kiddo's up there with a quivering lip and eyes welled up. He bravely tells me, "Louie is our friend, and you yelled at him very mean." Gosh dang it. I go back to the living room. "Louie, could you come down here, please?" "I'm sorry, what?" He stomps into the living room. I was very frustrated because I worked hard to clean the kitchen. Then I saw it messy again, but I did not ask what you were doing or how your day was before getting mad about the kitchen. I should not have yelled at you, Louie, or said bad words. You are my friend, and I will try to use nicer words from now on. Louie looks at me dead in the eyes and says, "The Ev?" Then he turns and sees Kiddo watching both of us. "Oh, gosh dang it. Fine." And he cleaned the kitchen. My kid asked us to hug each other afterward. Louie and I are still friends. He's got his own baby now, and Karma's a female dog, Louie. Story 2. Not a parent, but I remember when I was 17, my parents thought I was lying about where I was when I was going out. Like I wanted to extend my curfew or something. Backstory, I am from a really small town, with really not a whole lot for teenagers to do. So my friends and I liked to hang out at the Waffle House by this bar. Every Friday or Saturday night, it never failed. Like 3 or 4 drunk people would get arrested, and my friends and I just liked to watch. It was 10 out of 10 entertainment. So one night, crap was going down. One night at this particular Waffle House. So I called my parents and asked them if I could extend my curfew just a little bit. I told them why, and they didn't believe me. So they called the Waffle House where I was and asked for me. When the waitress, who knew me well because I was there a lot, handed me the phone, my mom was like, "Oh my gosh, you really are at the Waffle House." I think that was the first time my mom realized I was a loser. Needless to say, I got my curfew extension. Story 3. One very drunk lady sitting at the bar in front of the grill cook was refusing to pay for her meal, to the extent that she was yelling at some point. She decides to stand on said bar and started yelling about how she was there was a hair in her food, and blah, 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 blah. She starts taking our clothes off, for reasons I am still trying to figure out. Well, in come the cops. Somehow the cops convince her to give them the number of someone they can call to come get her and possibly pay for her meal. 15-ish minutes later, in walks her dad, I think? Well, he was also visibly intoxicated himself, and he gave the police his name, and it was loud enough where I could hear it. So I pull out my first-generation smartphone and Google his name. Turns out he is a registered SA offender. So there's that tidbit. So he hands the waitress a roll of quarters to pay for the old girl's food, and cop lets the drunk man drive the drunk woman home, or at least away from the Waffle House. Now, I was like, are these cops really going to let this drunk guy drive away from here without a DUI? The answer was yes. They did in fact let the visibly drunk guy drive away. Right as the cops were driving away, some drunk airman right as the cops were driving away, some drunk airman, I lived near an Air Force base at the time, came and sat at my table and asked if we could help him order his food because he couldn't read at the moment. Dude was pointing at pictures to order his food, so that happened. Meanwhile, in the back corner, some drunk chick starts yelling at her boyfriend and goes to the bathroom and slams the door. When the door slams, he said, "I just asked her if she wanted hash browns." So friend, now you know why the Waffle House was such great entertainment. Did we really just get back-to-back Waffle House stories? Look, I'll say this much. The All-Star Breakfast is to die for. It's unmatched, but you might run into a little bit of chaos. Worst case scenario, though, those employees can throw hands. You're safe. Story 4. When my daughter was young, I was trying to teach her the value of money and decided to start giving her an allowance. She had a few tasks to do around the house, and afterwards on the weekends before we would go out, I'd give her $5. I explained that because she helped out and did her chores, she had earned money to spend on whatever she wanted. She happily accepted and stashed her money in her room. I thought nothing of it. Later that evening, before I tucked her into bed after reading to her, she goes to her money jar, pulls out $2 and hands it to me, and explains that it's for being a good daddy. Edit. It's come to my attention this isn't the definition of backfiring. Please take back your imaginary internet points. To answer some questions, after I got the money, I gave her a hug and told her I loved her. When she was asleep, I put the money and some more in her jar. Many years later, as she approaches being a teenager, she still works hard and listens, accomplishes the tasks I set out for her, and doesn't know the value of money. She has not been left wanting. I tried again with giving her money for her birthday and taking her to an aquarium she wanted to go see. She was given enough to pay for a meal, her tickets, souvenirs, and small shopping trips afterwards. She bought small trinkets and a pair of boots and a shirt. She saved almost half the money. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right or wrong. I'm just struggling like every other parent I know. Story 6. When my older son was about 3 or 4 years old, we realized he was starting to act very spoiled and materialistic. We always tried to make him see how lucky he already had it, but he constantly begged us for every toy and candy and treat he saw anywhere and everywhere. Around that time, I came across a great photo spread that involved the photographer traveling around the world and snapping photos of different children with their most prized possessions. Of course, the kids in the US, Canada, and Europe were mostly photographed in rooms filled with stuff, but there were also photos of children from impoverished nations, usually showing the child with only one old, dirty stuffed animal. I thought I was going to accomplish this brilliant parenting move by sitting him down and going through the photos with him. I'd explain how the kids with rooms like his were beyond lucky, and he should feel more than satisfied with all of the great stuff that he had. Then I would show him the other photos, and he would finally understand that there are so many other children in the world who had far less than he had. We looked through the photos and talked about each one. We finally got to one with a little boy standing on his cot, with his one possession, a well-loved, dingy-looking stuffed monkey. My son looked at it for a long time. I could see his wheels spinning. Success, I thought. After a long bit of silence, he finally looked up at me, gave me a sweet, small smile, and said, "I want that monkey." Story 7. I told him no food downstairs. He had to eat at the table if he wanted to, and not his playroom. When the second kid came, I would bring down his bottle and snacks so he could eat his solid foods that helped his teething while we played. My older kid flipped out because there is no food downstairs. That was like a basic rule of life to him now. When I said it's okay because his brother is a baby and I'm here, he took advantage of some shared snacks the kids had later. He would try to give his brother snacks that he liked so he could eat them downstairs too because his brother was. So I see him sitting in his play tent eating animal crackers and giving his brother one as they hide from me because he knows it's technically wrong. But he eventually saw the reason why I made the rule, because although the younger kid would eat 1 to 2, he would then mash the third into paste and rub it all over his toys. Story 8. I wanted to teach my son the value of money and work ethic because he kept wanting Robux. I decided it would be a great teaching moment and a win-win opportunity, as he was just getting to the age in which I think he should start doing chores around the house. He really wanted to buy some skin or something, so I created a chore chart and gave each chore a value. We established a schedule and everything. It was working out majestically every day without asking. He was doing dishes, cleaning his room, picking up the dog poop. It was epic. Then one day, I came home and nothing had been done. I asked him, "Hey man, what's up with the dishes? Oh, and go pick up the dog poop too." He simply replied, "Nah." Fighting back rage, I simply said, "Excuse me?" He said he made enough money over the last X days that he bought his skin, and he was good now. It was kind of hard to argue with. Story 9. Not a parent, but when I was like 16, my dad told me that I need to stop treating him and my mom like my friends because they are my parents. The very next day, before I got home from school, I had friend requests from both of my parents on Facebook. I denied them both. When my dad got home from work, we had a conversation that went like this. "Dad, did you see that your mom made a Facebook account?" "Yes, I did." "Well, did you accept her friend request?" "No, I didn't." "Why not?" "Because just yesterday you told me you were my parents, not my friends." "By the way, I also denied your friend request as well, Dad." I figured I was about to get my butt reamed for that, but my dad just looked at me. Looked at my mom, who was almost in shock over my response, and said, "He's not wrong, I did say that." My dad and I still laugh at this. Of course, it's been 8 years since it happened. Story 10. My youngest boy would never listen, and he was always totally fearless. He was also always really lucky. Dang near every time either of us told him, "Don't do that, you're going to get hurt," he would do it and then not get hurt. So we ended up teaching him that when we said not to do something, that probably meant it was a fun thing to do. I remember really hoping that he would fall and break an arm or something, not life-threatening or disabling him like that, but he would stop constantly giving us heart attacks, which I know is weird to say as a parent, but it never happened, so it doesn't matter anyway. He never got anything worse than a small scrape or cut that could be cleaned and covered in 5 minutes before he was back at it again. Looking back, I'm just glad this was before anything like the internet charades around to further encourage that crap. Now, he's a stuntman for movies. Can't say I'm surprised. Story 12. When I was a Cub Scout, my family and I attended a large fundraising dinner. This included a raffle with many prizes, the best of which was a brand new pool table. At the time, I had an allowance of $2 a week. I asked my parents if I could use up my allowance money for the next 6 weeks and spend $12 on my raffle tickets to try winning the pool table. Everyone wanted that prize, and everyone was adding handfuls of tickets. There were dozens upon dozens stuffed into the jar. My parents decided that this would be a good lesson about the dangers of gambling. They agreed to let me use my allowance for the next 6 weeks, but warned that I wouldn't win the prize and would not be given any more money for quite some time. I'd have to learn the hard way not to pay with cash I didn't have. I won the pool table. Take it from someone who's gone in deep. You're 1-0, baby. Get out while you can. Story 13. Not a parent, but when I was little, about 3 or 4 maybe, it was a long time ago, my aunt tried teaching me a lesson which backfired on her. I used to stay with my aunt a lot as a kid because she lived in a caravan and it was cool. Plus, it gave my parents a free weekend every once in a while. One day, in the car on the way back from shopping, my aunt decides to have some real talk. She says to me, if someone tries to make you do something you don't want to do, you say no. You never have to do anything you don't want to do. Now, of course, Aunt was saying this in reference to drugs or peer pressure, etc. Unfortunately for my aunt, I took this a bit too literally. We got back from shopping and she asked me to take in a few things with me. My immediate response was, "Nah, I don't want to do that, and you can't make me." So I trotted off inside. Aunt told this to my mom and she couldn't help but laugh. In fact, my mom still laughs about it to this day. Story 14. Not me, but my wife sat our daughter down when she was 4 and showed her the UNICEF Starving Children commercial. My wife's intention was to get our daughter to understand how much she should appreciate what she has. Now, because we live in a small town that is upwards of 80% Caucasian, my daughter hadn't really encountered too many people in her life of different nationalities and creeds. So, out shopping the following day in line at a local grocery store, my wife was in line behind a black gentleman. To which my daughter very loudly announces, "Mom, look! It's one of those people that live in the dirt!" Thank goodness he had a sense of humor. My wife went about 50 shades of red and regretted her approach to being thankful for what you have. Story 15. When I was 7 years old, I found a cigarette at a party. My dad saw me carrying it and asked me what I was doing. I said, "I'm looking for a lighter so I can smoke this." He handed me a lighter, thinking it would teach me not to smoke. I smoked weed and tobacco, sometimes both and sometimes one or the other, from the age of 11. I finally quit about 18 months ago after smoking for decades. I believe that I'm responsible for my own behavior, but my dad's nefarious plan obviously didn't work very well either. Ooh, that's that's a tough way to go. I have a buddy like that who his dad caught him smoking a cigarette and he went, "Okay, you're going to smoke one, you're going to smoke the whole pack." And he was like, "This is awesome." So unfortunately, he's still at it to this day. Story 16. My son is nearly 2. We've taught him don't touch for certain items that can't be baby-proofed. A floor lamp, the fireplace's glass door, low windows, etc. He completely understands that don't touch means do not put any part of your body on this thing. No hands, no feet, don't lean against it, nothing. So now we have to watch him like a hawk. Because throwing a toy car at the glass isn't touching, neither is whacking a window with a clothes hanger, or shoving an end table into the lamp super hard. We've taken to yelling, "That is still touching!" He also saw his cousin, a year older, get her butt whipped for breaking the rules. Now my son has never had a hand put on him other than playing booty drums after a bath when he runs around dodging his diaper. But that one moment he saw it burned into his little brain. So when I say, "Hey, don't do that, that's a no," he says, oh no, I know. And he pops himself in his own butt. Toddlers are great. So great. Story 17. Not a parent, but I did help raise my little sister after our mother drank herself to death. We had a real dysfunctional home life where I caught the most violent parts of it and she caught the tailwind, due to an 11-year age difference. The lesson I tried to teach her was exploring her passions early. I got her classes on game designs, drawing, etc. I asked about getting her into an art school, doing after-school stuff. It was like trying to get a cat to do those things. Point is, she was too afraid to tell me that I was ruining those things for her by trying to guide her, and now they weren't fun anymore. I still feel like a piece of crap for trying to push her to accomplish stuff. She's due to graduate high school soon, and I still worry that she has no life goals, meanders from passion to passion, and is just generally kind of lazy when it comes to putting in hard work. I know her mental health impacts a lot of what she does, same with me, but I still worry. I guess the point is, don't push your kids or whoever else to do crap if they don't seem enthusiastic about it. Sometimes you gotta be supportive from the sidelines, and that's it. Yeah, but also to be fair, as a teenager and even through your 20s, you're kind of jumping around through a lot of things trying to figure out what you like, trying to instill hard work ethic and such. I totally understand, but it's not like people her age and anyone else is having their overarching goals in mind already. Life's about figuring it out, baby. Take your time. Story 18. Not a parent, but the kid. I used to go to work with my dad during seasonal breaks for school. When I was around 6 or 7, we were coming home one day. I said, "How come there's a cop on that bridge?" And he immediately slows down and says, "Whew, you just saved me a speeding ticket. Good eye." Instead of going home, we made a quick stop to Toys R Us and he got me a Lego set to reward me. Being the little crap I was, I spent the rest of the week spotting officers, trying to catch people speeding. It was a great week for me because I got all the Star Wars pod racing Lego sets, but he caught on after that. I didn't get in too much trouble because he liked the Legos just as much as me. Story 19. We spend a weekend every year at a resort hotel with a water park. They also have an arcade. We load up a few gaming cards with credits and turn our 2 daughters, 9 and 7, at the last visit loose. Of course, the arcade has a number of claw games. The ones maneuver mechanical claw over the prize you want, drop the claw perfectly, watch in despair as the bauble drops out of the claw before making it to the receptacle. I tried to explain to our daughters that these games are rigged. It has nothing to do with how well you aim it and how well you drop the claw. The claw itself is motorized and is programmed such that it very rarely grasps strong enough to win the prize. Well, gosh dang it if we didn't leave our last trip with 4 bouncy balls and a couple of stuffies. My daughters are forever convinced that claw games are the best. I shudder to think what will happen when they're old enough to discover real gambling. Story 20. My 5-year-old, who is on the autism spectrum, was so excited for kindergarten. We told him he was going to learn all sorts of cool, new, interesting things. So on the day he went to meet his kindergarten teacher, he was so excited. He started asking a million questions. How is the electricity going through this building and getting to each classroom? I watch in science documentaries and I'm interested in quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement. Can you teach me about the theory behind quantum mechanics? Can we build nanobots and figure out how to make us live forever? This kid is extremely bored in kindergarten and he hates it. He gets in trouble almost daily now. He's not being taught about how to build robots or quantum mechanics. He's laying on the carpet and refusing to do anything. We are probably going to be homeschooling soon. Jeez, what a smart kid. I don't think I even heard the word quantum until Ant-Man. Story 21. I got frustrated with my 9-year-old son. He was being very ungrateful for everything. I was wishing for a dungeon under the house to put him in until he learned to be grateful for the things he had and what was provided. So in one of my more brilliant idea phrases, I decided that I would have him pack everything in his room and put it in the garage. Then he could show gratefulness and get 1 box back per week. I also took all the furniture out. He had his clothes on the floor and just his mattress on the floor. The room was bare other than that. This was a brilliant plan. This will show him, I thought, and teach a true life lesson. After 3 weeks, there was no change in him and he had not asked for anything back. I finally asked him what's up. He said that he really liked the room, being open, and did not miss anything he had. He's 19 now and has a bed, a shelf, and a chair. Nothing else. He truly likes the minimalist lifestyle. 0 life lessons were learned. Story 22. When I was pregnant with my 3rd child, the oldest son, number 1, was old enough to go to one of those cute big brother-sister classes at the women's hospital. They got to look through the nursery window at newborns and use the dolls to practice feeding the baby and changing diapers. I took him home and left him with Dad so I could do some shopping in peace. My husband was mowing while our toddler, son number 2, napped. He turned off the mower and heard son number 2 screaming his head off. When he checked on son number 2, he found son number 1 had decided to change his little brother's diaper. He took his brother out of the crib, waking him from a much-needed nap, and proceeded to use an entire box of baby wipes and an entire bottle of baby powder. Powder and wipes absolutely everywhere and a very angry toddler. Story 23. One day at 7-Eleven, my 4-year-old daughter and I witnessed a guy scratching off a lotto ticket in his car. Disheartening from not winning, he threw the lottery ticket out of his window and onto the ground. There were quite a few people around and in their cars as well. I wanted to show I was a good dad and to teach my daughter a lesson about littering. I walked over to the lottery ticket and picked it up while shame glaring at the dude in his car. My daughter asked me why I did that. I said extra loud so he could hear, because littering is bad and we have to protect the planet. I walked over to the trash can to throw away the ticket, and when I turned around, she had a handful of used cigarette butts. I was horrified, and evidently it was showing on my face. A lady in her car witnessed the whole thing and was laughing so hard she rolled down her window and yelled, "Well, that backfired, huh?" I had to take all those cigarette butts from my daughter and throw them away. She could tell something was up, and I could tell she was confused. That's what I get for being self-righteous. Story 24. I'm not a parent, but one time my father wanted to teach me the dangers of gambling, and it backfired tremendously. So I just turned 18 years old, and on my birthday, my dad decided to take me to the new 18-plus casino, electronic only, that opened about 15 minutes from my house. We arrive, and the first thing I noticed was how exciting the vibe was, almost like an adult Dave & Buster's. Anyway, we pull up to a huge 3-wheeled slot machine. My dad says the following: "Now watch how quick $20 will go with one pull. There's no reason to waste your money on these stupid machines." He then gestures to me to pull the huge slot handle, and I did, with a lot of joy too. Lo and behold, ding 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 ding, lights and sirens went off. Everyone turned their heads, and I just won upwards of $5,000 in less than 12 seconds. I looked at my dad. He had this weird combo of, "Holy crap, we just won $5,000,000, and holy crap, I just turned my son into a gambling addict." Well, got home to mom and with a smug face says, "So, what did we learn?" My reaction was simply this: $20 goes a long way in the casino. As I pull out my fat stack of 100s from my pocket, my mom looked at my dad with such confusion and panic. I will never forget the look on my dad's face. It was so genuine and in shock. I am not a gambling addict now, by the way, but do enjoy going to the casino and always remembering the look on my dad's face. Story 25. Obligatory, not a parent, but I can think of one that backfired for my parents. When I was about 11, my parents sat me down and made me read this story that my mom had gotten from another mom she knew. It was about this tween-aged girl who began talking to a boy about her age in a chat room, only to find out it was a middle-aged creep. The story was pretty obviously fictional and didn't really get under my skin at all, but I can appreciate the idea that my parents were trying to get ahead of the curve on teaching me internet safety. Internet-based chat rooms were pretty new at that point, and we had only dial-up for a little while, and I certainly wasn't allowed to be on it by myself. So I had no idea that talking to boys on the internet was even possible. It had seriously never occurred to me in the slightest. But I did after that conversation, and I immediately started trying to do so. Story 26. Not quite a backfire, but I think this is relevant and it's kind of funny. Substitute teacher, not a parent. I'm a regular in some schools, so I know the kids fairly well. Middle school, I'm in English classroom for a few days. I have a system where if a classroom is misbehaving, I give them a strike on the board. 3 strikes means silent work or some other reduction of privileges and installation of draconian law. Kids can earn strikes back with good work, so even when I do get to 3 strikes, it rarely lasts long. No big deal. Now, I'm not sure how it happened. I wasn't angry, just distracted and totally forgot myself. I accidentally dropped the word crap into conversation. As in, "Oh, your crap is all over the desk, dude. I can't walk through this aisle." I froze as soon as I said it. The kids froze too. This is middle school, and I've never accidentally sworn in front of the kids before, nor have I done it since. I turned around, wrote my name on the board, and gave myself a strike. We continued on with this lesson as if nothing had happened. Oops. Story 27. My nephew used to torment his sister, who was older by 2 years. My niece, by following her around, copying her, taking her stuff, generally doing what annoying little brothers do. She whined and cried to me all the time. 100 times a day she was crying for me to intervene, referee, send him away. One day when she was about 9, I said, in utter exasperation, "Becca, I cannot referee every time he does something that annoys you. Make it not worth his while to mess with you. Make him regret it." First time in her life she took what I said seriously. Thus began the stage of her development where whenever he did something to irritate her, she belted him as hard as she could. I mean major league wind-up and pigeon-style punches that knocked him right over. The first time I saw her take a world-class swing at him, she sassily said back to me, "You told me to make him rethink messing with me." To be fair, she usually gave him a warning. "Ryan, if you do that one more time, I'm gonna smack you. Ryan, if you don't knock it off, I'm going to throw you in that pricker bush." He didn't, so she did. She hip-checked him, flipped him right into that bush. If he stopped, he lived. If not, she went tiny blonde Mike Tyson on him. Story 28. My daughter was born with learning disabilities and was in the program with special needs all 12 grades in school. She begged for a cat and our home was pet free, so I told her no many times. On her second semester of her senior year, I relented and told her she could have a cat if she graduated and on time. I knew she was struggling in 2 classes and prepared to send her to an alternative school if she failed. I figured no problem. In the cat denied department, while she walked to graduation with her peers, I was over the moon ecstatic, jumping up and down, crying and screaming because her diploma cover had a diploma in it. All the other parents stared at me like I was a psycho, but 12 years in the public school system fighting for my daughter's rights took a toll. Parents of special needs kids will vouch for me on this subject. Anyway, after I calmed down, hugging and kissing my daughter, she calmly said, "Now can I have a kitty?" Story 29. At one time, 3 of my sons were sharing a large bedroom. I believe the ages at the time were 8 and 5 and 3. Bedtime was tough because of all of the horseplay occurring and the boys were constantly coming out of the room for some reason or another. We always tried to make sure they were settled before we went upstairs to our bedroom. On one particularly rambunctious evening, I came downstairs and sternly told them they had better stay in their room. It actually seemed to work. Fast forward a few weeks and my wife and I were helping them clean the room when we discovered a plastic tote in the closet full of urine. We're like, WTF? And my oldest son said, "You remember when you told us not to leave the room?" Apparently it became a very convenient toilet, even though the bathroom is right next to the bedroom. Story 30. Oh, this is a fun one that my parents had to deal with the repercussions of, but didn't teach me. Before 2nd grade, I was a well-behaved kid. Then come Halloween, and for the next year, I was a nightmare. Out of seemingly nowhere, my parents were baffled. I was lying, cheating, and stealing with wanton abandon. In about April of the next year, I was about to be sent away. My dad was threatening a military school or boot camp or something. My mom sat me down to talk about what happened and warn about what was going to happen if I didn't straighten up. I stand up, go to my bed, and pull out a comic strip I'd gotten from trick-or-treating the previous year. It was from a religious house and said, "If you lie, cheat, or steal, you are going to hell." So my 2nd grade self said, "F it, why bother behaving?" My mom was turned off from institutionalized religion from that moment forward. She explained I was fine, misbehaving was not the way to go, and I straightened mostly back up. Story 31. It didn't really backfire, it was actually an adorable scenario, but my 4-year-old sent me to timeout. Since a very young age, we've taught our daughter to talk about our feelings and how even if it doesn't make sense to us, we can't tell her how she's feeling, so she needs to tell us before she gets to a point of anger and frustration. We don't raise our voices at her or each other ever. I am someone who, when I'm upset, I like to take a little time out to myself to sort things out before I say something I might not want to say. In my house, timeout isn't a punishment, it's a time for self-reflection that we give ourselves. So the other day I dropped a can of soup on my foot. I immediately sat down and started to rub it because I'm a baby with 0 pain tolerance. She came over immediately, asking what was wrong, and my foot hurt so bad I couldn't get any words out. I just told her I was fine and just needed a minute. At this point, she responded with, "You should take a break in your room and sort yourself out. I'll check on you in 5 minutes to see if you're ready to talk." Then she set the kitchen timer and gave the silent treatment till it went off. Alright, that's adorable. And not a bad idea, you know? Why not give yourself a little bit of self-reflection? I can get on board with that. Again, I don't have any kids or anything, so I don't know what good parenting is. Story 32. I've been vegetarian for 20 years. My wife her whole life. When we had a daughter, we agreed that we would raise her vegetarian, but when she was old enough to decide whether she wanted to eat animals, she would be free to make that choice on her own. Last year, at 10 years old, she started entering a bit of a rebellious phase and decided she might want to start eating meat. That's fine, but in an effort to get her to think about where her food comes from, I suggested that we go rabbit hunting with Grandpa's old 22, so she can really see for herself if she wants to take part in that. Well, not only did she shoot a rabbit, skin it, butcher it, and eat it, but she wanted to go the next weekend as well, and the one after that, and the one after that. It's still nice father-daughter time, but honestly not worked out how I expected. You raised her vegetarian, and she became Bear Grylls. Story 33. My mother was just telling me a story about 3 years old me. We were poor, and she would sell necklaces she made on the street. Sadly, daycare or anything similar wasn't an option, so I spent a lot of afternoon with her while she sold stuff. Apparently, I was way too sociable, so as soon as she took her eyes out from me, I would sprint away, talk to anyone I ran to, and generally be an easy kidnapping target. So, of course, my mother sets me aside and gives me the whole "don't talk to strangers" deal. Apparently, I didn't know what stranger meant, so she told me to just not talk to anyone unless I knew their name and his mom's name. 5 minutes pass and I was missing again. Mom has to go out and find me. And sure enough, I'm sitting on a bench talking to some old guy. "Didn't I tell you not to talk to strangers?" said my mom. "But he's not strange," I replied. "His name is so-and-so, and his mother is so-and-so. I asked." Story 34. I'm not a parent, but when I had my little cousin over for a few days, he refused to eat what I had cooked. Wouldn't even try a single bite and was throwing a big tantrum. So I told him he could eat what I had made or not eat at all and go hungry. And for everything to eat, sweets and dessert, he asked after that I told him I could reheat what I had made. When he got to the bargaining stage, I told him, "I don't negotiate with terrorists. This is the deal. It's been the same from the start and it will not budge." He finally tried it and ever since loves my cooking. He'll willingly try anything if I tell him it's good, especially if I made it. Later on, I found out he has tried the "I don't negotiate with terrorists" line on his parents after they weren't budging to his tantrum. I had some explaining to do after that one. Lots of laughs were had after that, though. Story 35. On holiday, playing pool with my sons. The youngest reaching for the balls and putting them in the pockets. Told him, "Oi, never touch another man's balls." Everyone laughs, move on. Months later, all forgotten, his teacher telling the class off for the flooding incident in the bathroom. Someone had been putting paper towels in the sink and leaving the taps running. "Children, sometimes people have accidents in the bathroom. It is possible that someone could slip on the wet floor. So, what must we do?" My son's hand flew up and the teacher described it as the most positive a child had the right answer she had ever seen. "Never ever touch another man's balls," he replied. The teacher and the classroom assistant had to leave the room. Daddy got a bit of a telling off from Mommy on that one. Story 36. I'm driving my family to a barbecue yesterday. I have a 3-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy in the back seat in their car seats. My girl might as well be 16 years old and have driven us there because she's so mature and put together. My son is an absolute carefree wild man who only cares about having fun and smashing things. It's kind of awesome. Anyway, I hear my daughter say, "Uh-oh, brother made a mess." My wife looks back and he had dumped an entire cup of water all over himself. We specifically purchased these curtain special cups for him because they are the only ones he can't spill everywhere. We went through probably 10 different styles of cups to discover this. Turns out his sister gave him her cup and he was, of course, able to spill that all over himself. So I say, "Oh, sweetie, your brother is too young to use those cups, so let's not give them to him." I felt bad though because we're teaching them about sharing, so I then add, "But great job sharing." Talk about sending mixed signals. I look over at my wife and her eye roll said it all. She was thinking the exact same thing. We laughed it off and again commended her on sharing. Story 37. At the time, my son and daughter, who are now 28 and 27, were 7 and 6, respectively. I was driving and they sat in the back. They thought it was funny to keep taking off their seatbelts and had done this several times during our short trip that day. I had had enough and stopped the car along the side of our street. I made sure that they were securely fastened and I scolded them as I started driving slowly forward, telling them that if we were hit from behind, they did not have their seatbelts on, they would go right through this front window. As I said this, I tapped the front windshield under the rear view mirror. With a loud pop, my wedding ring hit the glass, shattering it into 1,000 cracks. They both started to cry, but never played the seatbelt game again. We all learned something that day, but my lesson cost me $300. Story 38. My son is an artist. He can draw really well. He just doesn't like to draw outside of his art class. He doesn't sketch despite having bought him numerous sketchbooks and supplies. I was always taught practice makes perfect. So we go to Alamo City Comic-Con and we are walking by a bunch of artist booths and he's just in awe of some of the great work. Enter Neil Adams. I love Neil Adams. His work is awesome. He's one of my top 5 artists. My son is looking over his work. Neil asks him if he's interested, and my son says, "I like to draw stuff like this for projects in class." Thinking this is the time to get him a lesson from a great artist and some tips about always sketching every chance you can to hone your craft, I ask him to give my son some advice. I start smoking because I've been hammering into my kid about always practicing and learning new techniques. Neil Adams looks at me and then looks at my son and straight up says, "Don't listen to those people who tell you to draw every day or set aside time to draw every day or draw every chance you get. Draw, sketch, pencil when you feel like it and what you feel like. Unless it's for a class project, until you find your rhythm and your technique, draw when you feel like it." He shook my son's hand and mine and then walked away. I was totally at a loss. Story 39. Not a parent, but a teacher. I teach a notoriously crappy age group, 2 to 3. So rewarding, but so awful. The terrible twos is not a lie. My class is where they usually learn to potty. Around March, we usually have all the kiddos in big kid underpants and are rocking and rolling right along. And then there's always a regression. It spreads through the ranks like dominoes, and for some reason, every single potty-trained kid goes back to having 3 or so accidents a day. I started handing out potty treats, skittles, as a reward for successful missions to the toilet. I had different qualifiers for each kid dependent on their progress, so it was fair. Some kids only had issues pooping in the potty, some kids struggled with accidents at nap, that kind of thing. In a matter of days, my kids were so finely in control of their bodily function, it was kind of hilarious. Several times an hour, they would try to pee and squeeze out a few drops if allowed. Then the negotiations started. I want Skittles. No, Tilly, you got Skittles just a few minutes ago. Skittles! No, but potty! And so on, times 20 kids, 8 hours a day. I had to regroup the very next week and stopped giving out any Skittles because, sorry guys, I ate them all. I got hungry, my bad. Story 40. I'm not a biological parent. My sister-in-law died during labor and my brother could not cope with it and abandoned his son. Long story short, I cared for him. We are from a really small village, like there's no crap to do here. So we worked on our farm, getting our one stuff and trading. Simple life, yet a happy one. I always tried to get my son to work on our farm, but he hated every single part of it, no matter what I did to convince him. He was always tinkering around with electronic stuff and became quite good at it. At first I thought that even though he hated working in the farm, at least I managed to get him into that lifestyle. Simple, calm, far from the troubles of the world. I really thought all was going to be fine. But one day our farm was burnt down to ashes, the kid gone full political over it and ended up blowing the Death Star. Story 41. Not a parent. My parents did this to me. My mother used the technique of forced choice, something she book learned while taking psych courses. Because I didn't want to go to bed at my appointed time, she'd say, "It's time for you to go to bed. Will you walk or shall I carry you?" Sometimes I'd walk, sometimes I'd choose to be carried, and she thought she had it all down. A couple weeks into it, I wanted to visit my friend across the street, the one with the neglectful mother whose house was always a mess, whose kids my parents hated because they were always effing stuff up in the neighborhood. Little vandals. I was 5. My little friend, Michelle, also 5, was fine, but I was always warned away. So I walked into the kitchen and said to my dad, "Hey, I'm going over to Michelle's house. Shall I use the front door or the back?" My father absolutely roared at my mother that all her dirty little trick had done was teach me to be as manipulative as she was. They were all ready to reap the benefits of the con, but weren't prepared for the blowback. Play female dog games, win female dog prizes. Story 42. I'm a parent, but this is about my mom and little brother. My mom was real big on making us read. We were 3 brothers, all into sports and had zero interest in reading books. We were preparing for a little road trip, and my mom took us all to the library and told us we could pick out one book about whatever we wanted, as long as we would spend the time reading it on the road trip. Everything goes perfectly to my mom's plan. This was designated reading time during the road trip, and the vehicle was complete silence. Then my little brother, maybe 7 or 8, goes, "Hey Mom, did you know Richard Kuklinski used to go to gay bars and wait for someone to start hitting on him?" Then my little brother, maybe 7 or 8 years old, goes, "Hey Mom, did you know Richard Kuklinski used to go to gay bars and wait for someone to start hitting on him? Then he'd follow them home and kill them for fun." Apparently, the book he picked was on the Mafia and Richard Kuklinski. Story 43. My parents always had this very rigid rule that if my brother or I didn't finish our dinners, we'd have to eat it cold for breakfast. I was a pretty picky eater, so I was often stuck at the table hours after everyone else had finished, and occasionally I'd end up eating gross things for breakfast too, and everything from cooked plain spinach to salmon. This lasted until I was about 11. On a Thursday night, my family and I went out to dinner to a Greek restaurant that my parents loved, but I wasn't fond of. I asked for what I usually got, a befteki yemista, about the closest thing to a cheeseburger that can be found in Greek cuisine, but they insisted I try something new to broaden my horizons. After a bit of an argument, they ordered me to grilled octopus and squid. The reason I was a picky eater is that I often choose foods based on texture. Rubbery is not a texture I'm fond of. In fact, I have a hard time swallowing it at all. So naturally, I did not eat the cephalopods. My parents, of course, said if I didn't eat it, I'd have to have it cold for breakfast. Friday morning, I was hungry enough to at least attempt to eat the cold, rubbery tentacles on my plate, but unsurprisingly was unable to swallow and gagged it back up each time I tried. My parents thought I was exaggerating to get out of it and said that it would still have to be the next thing I ate. By the time Sunday morning rolled around, I had not eaten anything since Thursday lunchtime, and I could barely get out of bed. It took me a long time to get down the stairs because my legs were shaking so badly and I was dizzy. In the dining room, I found the table laid out with scrambled cheesy eggs, bacon, pancakes, sausages, oatmeal, and pretty much every single one of my favorite breakfast foods. I immediately burst into tears knowing I'd again be given octopus and squid instead. My mom rushed over and gave me a hug and assured me that they had thrown the octopus and squid away and that the breakfast on the table was for me. Apparently, the night before, she and my dad had gotten into a fight that my mom had won, insisting that if they didn't stop enforcing the rule, they were going to kill me. They never tried to force me to eat cephalopods again. Salmon, unfortunately, was still on the menu for many future dinners. I understand the principle of hey, this is what we're having, you're going to eat it, but, within reason. He went however many days without eating? Why were they even still having a debate over that? Story 44. Not a parent, but a babysitter. I was taking care of a kid who did not like to eat food, with few exceptions. One of those exceptions was cookies. Well, one day I gave him pizza for lunch, but all he wanted was a cookie. He kept begging me for it and begging, but I told him to eat his pizza first. At some point I said, "You can't have a cookie until the pizza is all gone." The kid looked at me for a second and repeated, "All gone?" "Yes, all gone." This kid grabbed his entire pizza and dumped it in the garbage in one move. He turned around and smiled, "All gone." I know I shouldn't have caved, but I was so impressed that he outsmarted me, I just gave him the dang cookie. Though I made sure to think about my wording before I said things to him again. Story 45. My mom was annoyed at my brother. He was probably around the age of 6 for not eating his dinner, and she made an empty threat by saying if he didn't eat his dinner, he would have to go outside in the rain. She thought this would make him pick the obvious choice and just eat food. My brother, being incredibly stubborn, still refused to eat anything, so my mom had to follow through on the punishment and make him go stand outside. My brother was crying and throwing a tantrum on the step in the rain, and my mom went away for a couple of minutes to allow him some time to calm down. Just a few minutes pass, so she goes back to the kitchen to check on him. She looks out the window and sees my brother happily jumping and dancing around in the puddle with a big smile on his face, the happiest we've ever seen him, thoroughly enjoying every moment of what should be an unpleasant punishment. It's still one of my favorite stories of him. Story 46. My son was around 6 or so. Took him out fishing for the first time. He quickly got bored of it, just letting it sit there and waiting for the fish to bite, and decided it was way more fun to cast it out, then reel it in real quick, cast it out, reel it back in, rinse and repeat. He did this dozens of times while my wife and I told him that's fine, he could have fun practicing casting, but he would never catch a fish that way if he kept pulling the dang thing back in constantly without giving the fish a chance to bite. Well, of effing course, he caught his first fish ever about 10 minutes later. Must have snagged the thing on the hook on its way past. He was pulling it in that fast. It was a tiny thing that had to be thrown back, but his was the only fish caught by any of us that day. So much for teaching him patience. Story 47. This only backfired in terms of my daughter telling others about my extremely macabre lesson and feeling like a terrible parent. So here's the story. About 2 or 3, my daughter had a habit of running off as I was walking towards her when she was in trouble and slamming doors. I'd finally had enough of it, so I grabbed a stick of string cheese from the fridge and put her on one side of the door and put the cheese in the door frame sticking out and told her to just imagine if that was someone's finger and watch. Then I slammed the door, slicing the cheese right in half. I opened the door to see a wide-eyed child staring at the half of a perfectly sliced stick of cheese lying on the floor. After a minute, she picked her jaw up off the floor and went back to playing and never slammed another door. Now she's 5 and makes sure to tell her classmates and friends who have tantrums why they also shouldn't slam doors. I get a 50-50 mix of parents that think it's brilliant and or insane when they hear the story. Story 49. After my sister was adopted from big Asian country, my parents made sure to teach us that there were a lot of ways to make a family. It's kind of become a mantra at our house. However, they neglected to teach us everything about making families. Fast forward several years and my sister is out with a friend, while mom and I go strawberry picking with a new homeschool group. One of the mothers in the group was Asian and had just given birth to a baby. I go up and say the line I was taught to say, "Oh, your baby is so pretty. Where is he or she from?" They did not believe my mother's explanation, so we were back to looking for homeschool groups. While I knew that two people of the same skin color could have a baby of the same skin color and that people of all sorts of colors lived in America, my only experience with Asian people up to that point had been adoption. I literally thought all people of Asian descent in the Americas were adopted from another country. Did I mention I was 12 years old when this happened? Story 49. Not me, but my uncle. My uncle is a detective for a large PD. He, ever since we were toddlers, told us to never, under any circumstance, touch his gun. Cool, responsible thing to do. One day he was in his bedroom and he asked his daughter, we'll call her Coco, to hand him his gun. The moment her finger grazed the gun, he quite sternly reminded her about the rule to never touch his gun. Side note, he never kept his gun anywhere but locked in the safe. He put it on the nightstand for less than 5 minutes to teach her this specific lesson. Coco cried but understood why he tested her, and then the lesson stuck. Problem came when we hit about 12 and he decided to teach us gun safety. Coco flat out refused to touch the gun. So now all of us are in our mid-20s and know how to properly handle a gun, except for his daughter. Coco's go-to gun knowledge is that every gun is loaded and to grab an adult. Coco is 27, by the way, and a park ranger. Story 50. Not a parent, but my parents had a very strict rule from about the start of the 7th grade on, where I had to make all A's and B's on my report card. Should there be any C or lower at any point in time, all entertainment options, TV and Sega Genesis at the time, would be taken away. I would be forced to check out a book from the library and write a book report each month. There were also additional chores that would be expected, and if the C was on the last report card of the year, those punishments would be implemented throughout the entire summer. And I would also have to go to the Community Engagement Center, this was on a military base, and sign up for some volunteer work. It sounds like a lot, and it was. And up until my freshman year of high school, I met the requirements. So, by the end of the 8th grade, I was feeling pretty confident about my academic prowess. So much so that I decided to take honors classes, which were just a step down from AP. I figured I would give it a shot, and if it was easy enough, I would do those AP classes. First report card comes through. There's a C in honors history. Well, my parents kept their word, and I had to start the extra workload. The extra chores and book reports actually took study time away, so my overall performance went down. I think at one point I was actually failing my English class, which should be obvious to anyone reading this. When I would mention that to my parents, I was accused of being lazy and trying to weasel out of my punishments. They even kept their word about the end of the year report card too, because that summer I had to spend it volunteering at the community center, where I spent my first day scraping gum off the gym floor. As you can imagine, when it came time to choose classes for my sophomore year, I didn't pick any honors classes. F that noise. Well, my grades went back up and I was able to watch TV and play video games and freed from all the extra work. My parents didn't give a crap about the actual classes or what I was learning. They just cared about the letter result. Because of that, instead of actually pushing myself, I wimped out and took all the easy roads going forward. As a kid it made sense, but now that I'm almost 40, I can look back on it and wonder why the heck didn't they bother to engage me more than just 4 times a year when report cards came out. I'll add that neither of them went to college and my dad is a chronic underachiever. I mean, I understood their motivation, but the execution was flawed. Just wound up setting the stage for me to aim low and not take any risks in the years forward. Story 51. Wanted my kids to have a good concept of work and money, and that their effort is valuable. So I started giving them quarters. Son was 4, daughter 7, when they did chores outside the norm. They could use it to buy candy from me, which they could pick on bulk, runs, fuzzy peaches, that Lego-style brick candy, all the good stuff. The idea was I'd toss like $20 into this microeconomy for the quarters, and then only the cost of the candy every weekish to keep the quarters in circulation. The now 5-year-old has instead learned to save. So I keep feeding what are now dollar coins into the economy, and the now 8-year-old has a very keen sense of what regular work is, what's extra, and what that work is worth for her to complete. Story 52. My 4-year-old was invited to a party and kept saying the birthday girl needs to share her presents with him and that he should also get presents at her party. It took the best of 20 minutes to get him to agree that only birthday girl is getting a present that day and she doesn't have to share. Then we walk into a toy shop, and they have a remote-controlled Millennium Falcon and a Chewbacca that makes sound and stuff on sale. Both were discounted heavily, and I've been eyeing them for months knowing I'll never buy a toy that expensive. So after making it clear we're only buying a gift for birthday girl, I was in a bit of a dilemma. I took them casually and hoped he wouldn't notice, but of course he did. He asked me whose presents the Star Wars toys were for, and I told him it's just something I need for the house, which is why we now share the toys. I almost never get the chance to play with it, and then they'll probably not last more than a few years anyways. Story 53. Wanted to teach my boy the value of $1. He worked for his money, and we decided to turn his change into cash and go on a shopping spree at Toys R Us. He worked for it, he gets to choose what he wants to buy and live with it. We went to the bank, but their change machine was out of order. I didn't want to get charged for a fee for using a coin machine, so I find another one of my banks on GPS 10 minutes away, just to find out it's not there anymore. Now it starts snowing. We head to another bank of mine that I know is still standing half an hour away, but when we are 5 minutes away, we find out the bridge is closed and we have to take the long way around, which adds another 25 minutes to the drive. We finally get there. The bank is intact, and I give my boy the honor of carrying the Ziploc bag of coins in. The moment has finally come. He has a big grin on his face. He gives in to his excitement and starts swinging the heavy bag of coins, and suddenly the top tears off, throwing $80 plus of coins all over the sidewalk into the fresh snow. We start picking them up one coin at a time, but we can't pick them up with our gloves on, and so we have to barehand it. The snow melts on our fingers only to refreeze when we touch each coin, not to mention we have to sift through the snow to find the coins. He gave up in under a minute, and I was crouched over for 20 minutes trying to find the remains of his earnings. I actually started laughing hysterically out of the frustration. That was a first and only for me. We get into the bank defeated with my fingertips ablaze. There isn't close to half the amount of coins in the bag now. I had grabbed all I could find. I start dumping the coins into the machine and I start spitting them out as fast as I'm putting them in. They are covered in a black grease staining my hands. I don't know why the grease, but it was because they were wet from the snow and the machine isn't accepting most of them. In desperation, I just put them back in as if it's going to make things better until the machine finally just craps out on us at under $12. They said they could salvage the coins that were still in the machine and give it to me later. We went to a Toys R Us and I paid for $80 worth of Skylanders crap on my card. Story 54. My old man tells a story. It's set in the 1980s, back when he was building luxury houses. He tells of a rainy January. It's cold and miserable outside. The type of day where you just want to stay in bed and sleep all day. But that's not what a man does. A man gets up and goes to work. A man will get up and support himself even if he feels bad. My old man woke up that rainy, cold, miserable January day. He was tired and achy, but he had a job to do, dang it. He went to work feeling miserable. He put in a 12-hour day doing construction in the cold, in the rain. And he got up the next day too. He didn't feel like going to work, but he did, because this is what a man does. After another 12 hours of working construction in the cold, in the rain, and a third day, when he could barely get out of bed, he still went to work. In the cold, in the rain. 12 hours, feeling miserable, feeling tired, because that is what a man does. The morning of the fourth day, he couldn't get out of bed. He managed to call his girlfriend, now his wife and my mother, to pick him up and take him to the doctor. The doctor told him he had walking pneumonia. If he had waited any longer to come in, he would have died. My old man thinks the moral of this story is that you should get up and go to work even if you feel bad, because that's what a man does. What I took from that story is, if you go to sick work long enough, you're gonna die. Story 55. I've got the perfect answer to this from the child's perspective. My dad, who my mom divorced when I was like 1, had a short temper and always resorted to yelling. My mom always told me, "Your father thinks that being loud makes him right." And I have since taken that tidbit of info to head. When I'm in an argument or angry, I don't scream. I stay as calm as can be, mainly because I worked at retail and I noticed how much more angry it made the yelling customer that I was not resorting to their level of anger. It was like a sweet victory to be so calm as they got worse because I was calm and relaxed. You know who else it made mad? My mom. She'd yell about something and I'd calmly try to be like, "There's no reason to yell. Being loud does not make you right, Mom." Instant rage. I could almost see her Super Saiyan aura as she powered up when I'd throw that advice back at her. Example I remember. I was helping her set up her new GPS back when they were all the rage. I was trying to update her maps, but her PC was garbage. I mean, hot garbage. She tried to say it was because of something I installed that was slowing it down. I tried to explain that I had installed the games RF Online and Guns years ago, but that was it. It is in no way slowing down her PC. She didn't want to hear it. It was obviously something I did, and could not have possibly been the 15 million coupon adware programs that she had accumulated. She begins to yell over the top of my explanation because she loves to get her argument across, but make sure she yells over yours. So I whipped out the old line, "Hey, being louder doesn't make you right." Within a split second, the car charger for the GPS was being kamehameya'd at my head. And this is a Super Saiyan that's ascended past a Super Saiyan. Or you could just call it your mom being really mad at you. You gotta be careful using a line that she taught you against her divorced father. I mean, look, you're totally in the right, by the way. Story 56. One time my daughter got a C on a test that she'd studied hard for. Up to that point, she'd been nearly a straight A student. In the process of consoling her, I told the following story. In my freshman year of college, I had to take a mass comm writing class that was a notorious weed-out class. I was planning to minor in this field, so I was a bit worried I might not make the cut. Out of a class of 150 people, the grading curve and cliff was roughly 3 A's, 5 B's, 20 C's, and the rest D's and F's. I was one of the B's. I told her I'd never been more proud of a B before than I was of that B. Her takeaway? B's are awesome, and C's are great too, as long as it was a hard test where everyone struggled. And she's used that repeatedly since. Well, I only got a C, but it was a really hard test and everyone had a hard time, so I'm quite pleased with how I did. Oh boy. Story 57. Also not a parent, but apparently mine taught me this lesson well enough for me to pull this maneuver off. I was about 16 or 17, and it was one of my first attempts at drinking. A buddy's parents were out of town, and my friends and I all had the "we need to experiment with and learn booze" mindset. So we didn't get alcohol poisoning in college. Needless to say, since I had no experience, I overdid it. I had reached the stage that my friends like to consider hypnosis, which is where I'm physically up and moving, but there was definitely nobody home. We had to put all of our car keys safely out of the way to guarantee no one would try to drive home. But since I felt like absolute crap, I called a taxi to come pick me up and take me home. So apparently I completely forgot I had called a taxi. When he pulled up to pick me up, I was not fazed at all and just stayed, sitting on the porch. Again, completely forgetting that I had called and the taxi was for me. Soon after, the gentleman got out and walked up to me and asked me who I was and if I was waiting for a ride. I told him my name, but also that I was not waiting for a ride. I can only assume he said something like, "Sir, you called the taxi service and I am here to take you home." But with an aforementioned state of mind I was in, I started screaming at the stranger and then I ran off. I woke up under a bench in a public park. Thankfully, a kind jogger woke me up before any authorities found me. The only reason I can assume this story is accurate was because another partygoer, who was outside of the house smoking a cigarette, witnessed my taxi encounter and told me about it the next day. While I am proud I followed the rules of not getting into cars with strangers, this is one example of how rules should not always be followed. Story 58. I tried to teach my 4-year-old son not to stick his toothbrush down the tub drain because yucky stuff lives in the drain, which can get you sick. A few days later, his mother got sick. Again, trying to reinforce the importance of not messing with the tub drain and using mom as an example, he asked why mom was sick, and I replied with, "Well, maybe she touched the tub drain." A look of bewilderment overcame his expression as he thoughtfully asked his mother, "Mom, why did you lick the tub drain? Don't you know you can get sick?" We thought it was funny until he went to daycare, and upon picking him up, had to explain to the daycare workers through their laughing tears why our son was telling all the other kids and teachers that his mother had licked the tub drain. I still catch heck from her when trying to teach my son about the ways of life. Story 59. Not a parent, but as kids, my mother would have us clean for fun, so she could have more time to herself. I was around 5 and my brother was 3, and she asked us to play the clean the glass game, since earlier we used washable window markers on our sliding door. She gave us Windex and paper towels before going outside for a smoke. I begin ripping a few squares of paper towels when I hear my brother innocently call my name. Turning around, I am immediately hit in the eyes, faced with a few squirts of Windex. I screamed, blindly ran to the door where my mother was, and she had to sit there and flush my eyes under the kitchen sink for 10 minutes while both myself and my brother cried. It was not fun, and after that fiasco, the lesson went from being cleaning is good and fun to don't use dangerous chemicals on your siblings. Story 60. Just recently with my daughter, I wouldn't categorize it as completely backfired, but I'll just describe it for you. We've always told our kids to be respectful of others. try to be friendly with everybody. There's no reason to be mean. Generally, they're pretty great kids. They sibling fight with each other, and then there's been the occasional jealous, "that's mine," with other kids, but they make me proud in general how they act in public and with others. Well, some other kids are just a-holes and can't be helped and aren't worth the effort. My daughter has been coming home in tears because this one girl at school is mean to her no matter how nice my daughter is to her. She was saying, "I keep being nice to her, but she keeps being mean." She was shocked when I said, sometimes the nicest thing you can do for someone is to ignore them, and thought ignoring someone was mean and hadn't even considered it. I took what I thought I knew and tried to educate them, but there's so much more to it than what I've experienced in my lifetime. I wish there was a "here's how to parent" guide. I've read many guides, but they're all just written by people like me, random folks with opinions based on their own upbringing. Something like Wikipedia, but how to do crap the right way? I don't know. Anyway, being a parent is hard and really sucks sometimes. Try to do the right thing and it backfires, but not at me. It's usually at my kids. Story 61. Not so much a lesson, but a bad habit. My best friend works from home, and from time to time watches his nephew when his sister is busy. He told me he was out doing some yard work when the nephew told him he had to go inside and pee. Not wanting to waste time going in, he told him he could go behind the bush and use the bathroom if he needed, and he opened a new door up in this 5-year-old's mind. It became the new thing at his house, watching his nephew peeing outside in the backyard. Fast forward to the nephew's T-ball game a few weeks later. Standing in the outfield in the middle of the game, he drops his pants to relieve himself in the grass in front of everyone. All the parents in the stands thought it was hilarious, but of course his mother was glowing red with embarrassment, and my friend got an earful about teaching him to do that. But that's what fun uncles are for, though, am I right? Story 62. My parents tried to teach me to manage money and finances independently in two separate but related fashions that both backfired. 1. They decided to pay me hourly to do chores, like 25 cents to teach me to earn and manage my finances. I decided that I preferred to be broke and free to play. They succeeded in teaching me to be financially responsible. They failed in that I stopped doing chores altogether. 2, they would give my sister and I a budget on all family trips for trinkets and snacks. I decided I would rather wait until I got home and spend all of the trip money on Legos, since I was otherwise broke from not doing any chores. I got into a cycle of living from birthday to birthday, Christmas to Christmas, trip to trip for all the toy wants and needs. Now when I go on vacation, I still never buy anything. There were a few chores that they added back into the mandatory rotation, like vacuuming and mowing the lawn. They just started paying a neighbor to do things like weeding. He was happy to get paid 25 cents an hour to do mind-numbing gardening. Story 63. I hope someone sees this. Not a parent, but when I was 9 and my sister was 7, we'd tattle on each other for using curse words like heck and crap. Our parents got sick of it because it was pretty obvious that we were purposely trying to get the other in trouble. So they told us that we could say bad words at home in private as long as we weren't insulting anyone. Example, "Oh crap," if something got broken, or "Oh, that hurt like heck," if one of us scraped a knee. Of course, we abused our power and the privilege was taken away very quickly. So we had to come up with something else. The one that my sis came up with still sticks with me. She started calling me a brown piece instead of a piece of crap when she was mad at me and my parents wouldn't take it away from her because it was technically not a swear or curse word. Story 64. As a child of a parent who strongly instilled the values of being frugal with money, saving it and spending it with care and consideration, I think this backfired a little. For a long time, I viewed any kind of debt as literally evil, because in my mind, if you owed money, then you weren't saving money. Debt is, in a sense, the opposite of being frugal. I refused to take on any debt, ever. I wouldn't go to college because student loans were debt. I wouldn't open a credit card because that meant debt. I wouldn't buy anything expensive or name brand even if it was better quality because sticker shock gave me ridiculous amounts of anxiety. To some extent, I regret this now. I even tried going back to university, but the process was so painfully expensive it made me physically ill. Paying thousands per class is much more real when you are pulling that money out of your own pocket every semester. On the short term, it feels like you don't get your money's worth because the books are extortion and the professors are crap. More than once I asked myself, it should be a crime to charge me thousands of dollars to come to a classroom and be told by a guy with a degree to read out of the book. What am I paying for? I could have been paying for a better future, but I didn't because I thought debt was evil. Story 65. This will get buried, but my oldest son really took to heart that he could tell me anything. We never had a weird sex talk. I answered questions in age-appropriate ways and gave my kids all of the information they needed, including keeping the bathroom stocked with condoms that all of their friends knew were there for their use, not for looks. My oldest still, at 29, tells me far more than any mother ever needs to know about their child's sex life. He actually admitted a few months ago that he occasionally uses it to throw me off track if I'm asking questions he doesn't want to answer about other subjects, because I tell him I don't really need to hear all that and I get off the phone. Story 66. As a mother of a daughter, I enforce safety religiously. One of the safety measures I instill in her is to always, and I repeat, always lock the door behind her. When this incident happened, I was living with my best friend. Since it was just us girls living alone in the shady area of town, this was super important. It's safe to say my kid knew to lock the door. It was the 4th of July, and my best friend, daughter, and I were hanging out on the back patio after lighting off fireworks. It got late, and my daughter got tired and went to bed. My friend and I stayed outside since the weather was nice to continue hanging out and chat without waking up the kiddo. Long story short, my daughter locked us out. It took over an hour to wake her, and the entire neighborhood in the process, in the middle of the night to come let us in. The reason it took us so long to wake her after throwing rocks at her window and yelling in unison at the top of our lungs out to her, it was because I made sure to be as loud as possible when she was sleeping as a baby so I wouldn't have to worry about her being a light sleeper. Plan worked. Hey, she sleeps like a rock. Backfire number 2, touche life. Story 67. Not at all humorous, I am regretting teaching my daughter that the most important thing is to be nice to others rather than self-preservation and self-esteem. Around the time she was born, cyberbullying and bullying in general seemed to be at an all-time high. This was around the time that Amanda Todd unalived herself, and I really considered it a topical issue and hoped I could raise my daughters to not be that mean girl. Fast forward 13 years later, my kid is the vulnerable one. She's so sweet and sensitive, I spent way too much time worrying about her not being a bully because she was always popular, pretty, and smart as a toddler. She fit in really well, so I didn't stop to think about what happens when she no longer fits in. She can protect those that don't fit in, but she can't protect herself. Therefore, she never goes against the grain. I never taught her how to say, F those female dogs, I don't care what others think, because I was too busy teaching her to care about what others feel. There's a magical happy medium in there somewhere, but it's an effing crapload of luck to be able to get there when you are working with two unknowns. You don't know how sensitive your kid is or will be in the future, and you don't know which end of the scale they will be encountering more. I taught her to be nice, but I now have a kid who cries herself to sleep every night because she is nice and still gets left out. I wish I taught her more resilience. Story 68. I have 3 children, all preteens and teens at this point. I've always been a stickler about keeping things contextual with my kids. Jake didn't throw his crap in the hamper. Just tell him why that upset you and move on. And by the way, don't do the same thing. Jojo keeps leaving her backpack in front of the steps. Go tell her and just keep it moving. This kind of diplomatic approach has had a, fair success, more especially as they've grown older and probably more tolerant of each other and, of course, me. Plus, they say little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. A mantra I constantly keep in the back of my mind. Now I have a 16-year-old, high-honor student that recently discovered friends drinking and smoking and girls. He's also an all-county cross-country runner, nerd, and has been a passionate wrestler, dedicated to the sport since middle school. He's contemplating an early retirement from cross-country and wrestling. For me, wow, that's not really a problem for me, just a life choice for him. But back to the lesson. I also have a 15-year-old boy who was always shadowed, big brother aside from academics, quiet and good-natured with a fair amount of a-hole to even that out. Middle kid, lacks confidence like his older and younger siblings, but is brilliant at hiding this. Plus, he's likely the most street-smart kid, and probably the most intelligent. He's had these recurring issues with these other kids for years now. Ethan is no saint, trust me, but this other kid has always been around him. I think they have harassed each other almost equally up until a year ago. This other child decides to continually and constantly text my son. My kid responds at first, but eventually blocks him, and they play this cat and mouse game amongst messaging platforms for months. Ethan did come tell us that this kid was a jerk. Obviously, we knew this. We gave him the impression to just ignore the kid, stay away from him, and he will dissipate in time. This past June, we get a call from the school. We call back to the principal, who informs us that Ethan had a situation that took place on school property. The short version, my kid photoshopped a picture of that other kid with a chicken in his mouth. Nice! Well, he did not distribute said piece of art. He did decide to hand his phone to another classmate who was happy to screenshot it, airdrop it, and distribute said content across the high school. Beyond this, Ethan also lied to the administration about his involvement, causing them to investigate further. Meanwhile, the victim's parents also go to the police and, drumroll, file harassment charges against Ethan. You can all imagine what happened next. Just picture the worst case scenario times 2, and you're close. I should never had implied that my kids quietly allow themselves to be bullied or harassed without recourse. Telling my son to disregard that bullcrap only amplified an inappropriate response later. Addressing an issue head-on is great if you address it maturely. If you can't and you aren't mature enough, tell your parents. And don't lie to the school about something that revolves around a hot-button issue or welcome to perjuring yourself and destroying your credibility. Story 69. My daughter, 4 at the time, had a bad habit of sticking things in her nose. Anything she could find, she would shove it way up there. And eventually she began putting things in her ears too. So out of fear of her harming herself and being a completely inexperienced mom, I told her there was a monster that came and snatched kids who put things in their ears and noses. She never would believe me, until one day I was watching a YouTube video of the Pan's Labyrinth scene in which the girl awakens the hand-eye monster thingy. I'm not sure how I even got to that video, but she walked in, and when she saw it, she smirked and said, "Is that the monster that gets kids for putting things in their noses?" As if she knew I was full of crap. I looked her dead in the eyes, my face as serious as I could make it, and I said, Yes it is." Her little eyes got big as saucers and she gasped. Never had a problem with her putting things in her ears or nose again. A week later, I got a call from the daycare. My daughter had told all her daycare buddies about the monster and was trying to get them to put stuff up their noses so she could meet it. The teacher told me she made a big show out of putting her hands over her eyes and walking with a limp. Apparently, 1 or 2 of the children were having nightmares and refused to take naps anymore. I was so embarrassed. Thankfully, she has turned out to be a very sweet and loving girl, but she was such a creepy preschooler. Story 70. Not a parent, but a story about me as a child, as told to me by my mother. When I was probably 3 or 4, the Blues Clues live show was touring, and my mom and Mommel were going to take me to see it. Before the show, we decided to eat at Bob Evans, which used to be known for its little store full of trinkets. Think like Cracker Barrel, but way smaller. While browsing the shelves, I spotted a plush toy duck, and Mom agreed to buy it for me. As we prepared to go into the show, I was adamant that I must take my duck inside with me. Now, my mother was well aware that chances were I would leave the duck somewhere inside and throw a fit once I realized it. So she said I couldn't bring it in. I asked why, and she replied with, "The duck can't come inside because he doesn't have a ticket." I thought for a moment before replying, "Well, maybe you can stay in the car and me, Mom, and the duck can go inside." This is always the story that gets told about me at all of our family dinners. Story 71. Not a parent, but I can tell a story my parents teaching me a lesson. I was 16 and just got my license the day before. I was not a confident driver yet. I had maybe 15 hours of practice behind the wheel, and I have no idea how I passed the test. They were pretty lax back then in the 90s. So I've had my license about 36 hours, and my parents say, "Your sister is off work in half an hour. Go pick her up and bring her home." I say, "I'm not ready to drive alone yet." They say, "Tough. Go do it." So I go. I drive the 16 blocks to Burger King to pick her up, and while trying to park in the parking lot, for about the 4th time ever in a spot, I hit the car beside me, ever so gently. So the owner comes out and freaks me out a bit, but looking back as an adult was pretty reasonable about it. I give him the insurance info and my parents' phone number. I leave with my sister. Once I left, the guy takes a look at the mark on his car, rubs it with his thumb, and it rubs off completely. He phones my dad and says what happened and says everything is cool. My dad decided to teach me a lesson, sees me when I get home, and tells me it will be $18,000 of damages, and I will have to pay for everything, and I will have to get a second job, and all the money I get from presents from my grandparents will go towards this for the next 5 years. Every day for a month, he goes on and on about how he got another call, and it's going to be even more expensive. I was crazy stressed out over it for a month, not sleeping, anxiety, stomach problems, till one day he tells me the truth. "Oh, by the way, the mark just rubbed off. I just wanted to teach you a lesson to drive more carefully." I never drove again until I was 26, after I graduated from college and got real lessons from a professional trainer. Story 72. My mom is a very spiritual woman, and she has always been rather innocent. Growing up, when I heard the word submission, I only heard it in a positive manner. You submit yourself to God, you need to submit to your husband also needs to submit to you. So overall, I learned that the word submission essentially meant that you were very good at putting other people before yourself. In high school, this girl Lauren and I had a crush on the same guy. Coincidentally, this guy is now my fiance. No offense to my fiance, but he was a total tool in high school. He pretty much played both me and Lauren back and forth for years until we both decided to team up together and never see him again. She was a sweet girl. I figured that if the whole crush situation never happened, we would be friends. I decided to make an Instagram post about her, and I tried to be really sweet. I made a big deal about how Lauren has the gift of submission. She tried texting me, asking me what that was all about, and I never received the text. Until days later when my service changed, so it looked even worse. We never became friends, and I still give my mother crap for it. But hey, I got the guy in the end, and he turned out to be pretty amazing. Story 73. The reverse from the kid's perspective. When it came to splitting something, chocolate bars and such, my mom had a rule between us kids. One splits it and the other picks the half they want first. This progressed into chores at a later age. One could split the lost, the other picks what they want as theirs. I learned super early that my sister favored never taking the trash out or dishes, anything involving nasty. The trick then became picking the minimal overall work by having those two in my list. Not a lot of rain recently, and the living room is most clean because we haven't been home much. Trash, dishes, vacuuming, mowing. She can do the laundry or clean the basement and game room and take in the groceries. I maybe spend a total of 30 minutes doing stuff, most of it being running the lawnmower over the brown grass. She gets to waste a few hours cleaning and balancing laundry loads and carrying the weekly load in, all because she hates the smell. Story 74. My father would actually try to teach my siblings and I lessons through terror. We all resent that he ever did it, but he still sees it as successful. My father was the head of a large company, which will remain nameless, we're in deep enough water as it is, and used a former employee to scare us into believing. How? Whenever we did something wrong, for example, forget to leave a note that we had a run of milk, for example, he would put it all in the car and drag us to the store. He then proceeded to hit a pedestrian crossing the street and their arm would get torn off as my father yelled, "If only someone had left a note, this poor man would still have his arm." The one-armed man would then hobble up to the car as us kids are screaming in terror. My dad would open the window and the man would say, "And that's why you always leave a note." Little did we know the one-armed man was a former employee who was already armless, and what we'd seen torn off was a prosthetic limb. To be fair, we all leave a note now. Story 75. When I was 6 or 7, I used to take any and all money that I found around the house. And I'm not talking $1 or $2. My dad used to leave hundreds of dollars in our laundry room that he took out of his jeans at the end of the day. Don't worry, I didn't use any of it. I just liked having it because it made me feel like a grown-up. Eventually, my parents had to sit me down and show me all the different kinds of monetary bills and told me I shouldn't pick up anything more than what looked like a $1 bill. Well, every year we would walk over to my grandma's house for Christmas and she would give all the older kids a $50 bill. That year, when we walked back from her house, my brother dropped his $50 on the path between our houses. I left her house later than him, and I actually saw it on my way back, but I didn't pick it because my parents told me not to pick up anything more than $1. When I got home, my brother was freaking out about it, and my parents were upset at him for losing it. You can't even imagine the looks on all their faces when I told them I saw it, but didn't pick it up because of what they had just told me. And no, we weren't able to find it again. Story 76. Not me, but my dad told me this story about when he was younger. You know how back in the old days, during the 1950s, it was considered okay to force kids to smoke a whole carton of cigarettes so that the kids would get so sick of it and never want to smoke again? Well, that happened to my dad. He picked up a discarded cigarette butt on the way home and were joking around with his friends by pretending to smoke. His dad was mowing the lawn and saw his son doing that and jumped to conclusions. My dad didn't even get to explain to his dad that he had never smoked a day in his life, that he just found it on the ground. He was promptly forced to smoke a whole carton of cigarettes so that he wouldn't do it again. To this very day, my dad's still addicted to cigarettes and still can't believe that was a thing during the 50s. Oh my gosh, this is exactly like my friend's story, except he's 25. And he was smoking for real on purpose. But gosh dang it, does that thing backfire? That's sad. Story 77. We have a multicultural family and several adopted children, both international and from the US. Some of our children did not celebrate Christmas before they came to us. We didn't want them to think they were bad kids that didn't get presents from Santa before they came to America, and wanted a historical version of St. Nicholas. Tried to teach one of our American-born adopted daughters about the history of St. Nicholas when she came to us, as we taught all of our kids. We talked about how he was a historical man and all about his life, and how we can show kindness by secretly giving presents as Santa, meaning we are giving without the person receiving knowing who it is that gave. She went and told her elementary class that the real Santa Claus is dead. She had to sit in the hall during Santa's visit because she insisted he was dead and wouldn't let it drop. Oh boy. Definitely got a call from an unhappy teacher. We tried to recover that situation so she wouldn't do it again, but it's a funny memory now. Story 78. Believing our parents and grandparents to be hopelessly outmoded, my wife and I were consulting the expert literature in raising our son and daughter, 14 months apart in age. They said that by age 2.5, my son should begin to experience a few limits on his behavior. The hi-fi preamplifier, previously kept out of his reach, was put on a lower shelf, but he was calmly, verbally discouraged from touching it, and his hands were gently removed if he persisted. I returned from work at the usual time, which he had learned. I walked in the front door to find he had taken my favorite LP from the shelf, removed it from its jacket, and was treading firmly on it, wearing his shoes. The hi-fi equipment went back on the higher shelf, as well as the records. This was the beginning of an established pattern. I soon learned that I was unable to modify his behavior by any tactic or strategy whatsoever except physical intervention. This has persisted into his middle age. I gave up long ago. Fortunately, he is generally kind-hearted, thoughtful, and polite. Had he been as rebellious and self-willed as I was, it would have been sheer chaos. Story 79. I was the kid in this situation, not the parent. I was about 10 years old, and I ended up getting into a fight with my sister-in-law. My mom was particularly upset with my behavior, so she sent me to my room and told me that I could come out when I was sorry and ready to apologize. Unfortunately, she had somewhat forgotten that I was extremely introverted and that I loved being alone in my room. I was the type that didn't need any type of entertainment for hours on end and would just be at complete peace being isolated from the rest of the world. So I sat in there and even napped for a bit for hours on end, happy that nobody could bug me and it would go against the point of the punishment. Far later, my mom checks in on me and asks why I haven't come out yet. I tell her that I was instructed not to come out until I was sorry and ready to apologize, which neither have happened, and that I'm happy staying in here. She realized the futility in her actions and forced me out to apologize. Raising a kid that doesn't consider time out or being left alone as a punishment must have been a bit baffling for my mom and dad, honestly. Story 80. I was in the bathtub yesterday with my 2-year-old and he wanted to pee in the bath. So we had a conversation about where you're supposed to pee first. What I wanted to say was this. 1, if you can pee in the toilet, you should pee there. 2, if you absolutely can't pee in the toilet, you can pee in the bathtub, but really, you can probably pee in the toilet instead. 3, you should never pee outside of the toilet or the bathtub. He really latched onto number 3, ignoring points 1 and 2, and all evening he was telling me he wants to pee in the bath so bad. He also grabbed his chicken and ran around naked, making fire truck sounds and spraying imaginary fires, so maybe getting number 3 was just wishful thinking on my part. Story 81. So my father is weird, to put it nicely. He taught me never do something you don't need to do. So every time he asked me something and offered some kind of payment, I thought to myself, do I need the ice cream or the $5? Spoiler, as I'm as lazy as it gets, it never seemed important enough for me to help him, since I barely wanted anything and wasn't the type to go out of my way to do something with family, as that only happened on very rare occasions normally. So his never outwork yourself made me a, nah, I'd rather not have to do that than something slightly unpleasant for it. I'm not a person that prioritizes belongings and consumable goods. If he would have just asked me to do it because it would make him happy to do it with me, I'd have helped him, because that is far more worth to me. Story 82. When I was younger, Dad was doing something, and I was watching him. Eventually, I got bored and started trying to find words that rhyme with lucky aloud. Ducky, yucky, etc. Soon, I ran out of legitimate words I could think of, so I replaced the first letter in ucky with a random one. Rucky, zucky, etc. Meanwhile, my dad was still there beside me. I was probably annoying as heck, sorry Dad, but I got to F and I just blurted out the F word. My dad spun around and said, "What did you just say? You don't say that." I didn't know why he didn't want me to say it or what I just said, so I leaned in closer and asked him softly, "Say what? Effie?" He responded, yes, don't say that. I proceeded to spend the rest of the day coming to terms with my newfound fascination with the word Effie, and I didn't find out what it actually meant until many, many years later. Story 83. Not a parent, but it's still a lesson I'll remember when I'll be one. My grandmother was very adamant on us not being choosy on food. Wartime memories and all that. As a child, I absolutely refused to eat one particular type of veggie soup. Not sure how to translate the actual name in English, which both her and my mom loved. Now, both had a very specific method to make me eat something I didn't like, which was to keep making it day after day after day until I would finally cave in and say I liked it. It worked on most things, even on broccoli I had to give up, but not that soup. I was and still am stubborn to a fault. I refused to cave in for that culinary monster. It went on for a week straight of eating nothing but the very thing I hated most with tons of bread to mask the taste. On the 8th day, I threw up on the table after a single spoon of soup. My grandma watched me, shocked, and I still remember how effing happy I was. "Granny, the soup tastes like vomit." She never made it again to me, and to this day I still hate it with a passion. I will eat literally anything if I'm hungry, but I still refuse to eat that. I won that fight, and the only thing it taught me is that if you're stubborn enough, you're always going to win in the end. Which was exactly the opposite of what she was trying to teach, I guess. So no, if my children are going to be even remotely as stubborn as I am, I'll find another way to make them try all kinds of foods without actually getting into an endurance fight with them. Story 84. I'm not a parent, but this is from my parents to me. I always loved scrambled eggs, my favorite breakfast. So naturally, I wanted to know how to make scrambled eggs. My mother, probably not realizing that I was serious, jokingly replied, "You scramble them." A big mistake. Later that day, my mother finds me using my tricycle to smash and run over a whole carton of eggs in the hope of creating scrambled eggs. It was just a big gooey mess all over the floor. Luckily, 4-year-old me was smart enough to know to do it outside. Story 85. A stray dog was near me and my little kids. My 2 oldest yelled, "Doggy!" and my baby started squealing, and they all wanted to go and pet the dog. I told my kids, no, we don't pet or go near strange dogs, especially lost ones, because they could be scared and they might bite. Dropped my oldest off at school and carried on with my day. 2 hours later, I was letting a different stray dog into my car because it nearly got hit by another car. Hops right in and starts licking my kid's face. Well, so much for that lesson. Story 86. Oh boy, do I have a cringe story. Context. We had previously lived in India for a few years for work with our 3-year-old daughter. Anyone who's spent time in India will understand the stark contrast between those that have and those that have not, usually in close proximity to each other. A year or 2 later, living back in our home country, my daughter went through the "Daddy, I'm starving" phase all parents know and love. I was getting pretty tired of it, so sat her down and had a chat. I asked if she remembered living in India. "Yes, Daddy," she said. And if she remembered how many people didn't have a proper home but lived in the side of the road. "Yes, Daddy," she responded. I explained how they were probably starving as they didn't have money for food or clothes. It appeared to sink in, and I congratulated myself on a good bit of parenting. Fast forward a few days, we're heading into the supermarket. Ahead of us happens to be an Indian family also doing their weekly shop. My daughter pipes up in her proudest big girl voice, pointed at the family and declared, "Look, Daddy, they must be starving too." Never ran down another aisle so freaking fast. As I say, cringy on every level and complete backfire on me. Story 87. Well, I'm 12 hours late, but this is, in my opinion, a hilarious story. I'm the child in this story, by the way, along with my sister and not the parent. But oh well. My mom told me and my sister countless times that water and electronics don't mix. My sister left a popsicle, one of those ones in the plastic wrappers that slice the sides of your cheeks open, leaning against the DVD player once. And my mom went off on her for it. I knocked over a glass of water onto one of our computers and the same thing happened to me. Hey, water and electronics don't mix. Well, we lived in Oklahoma. Our mom was at work one day and a tornado was forming up in the field behind our house. Happened all the time, never hit our house, just started becoming a funnel cloud in easy viewing range. So my sister and I, being Midwesterners through and through, decided we should hang out in our backyard and watch the green clouds start to swirl. After a while, it started to rain. We both had our cell phones on us, and we had just been given cell phones for the first time, so we were not about to let them get wet. So we put them in the house and went back outside and kept watching the storm, standing in the entrance to the shed we had in the backyard to prevent us from getting too soaked. Eventually, the funnel cloud moved away, and we went back inside to 15 missed calls each from our mom and several texts. We both basically had panic attacks, but before we could really react, we heard the garage door start to close and our mom came screeching into the house, yelling our names. When she saw us standing there, like deer caught in headlights, all soggy and wide-eyed, she stopped short and stared at us. "Why didn't you answer your phones?" she asked. "We were outside watching the tornado," I said. She continued staring at me and my sister. "Why didn't you bring your phones outside?" "Mom," my sister said as if it should have been obvious, "water and electronics don't mix." My mom lost her gosh dang mind. Story 88. Not a parent, but this is what my mom taught me that completely backfired. I had an older sister, and I think as a way to prevent us from running to her every time we fought, she made a rule of, whatever someone does to you, you can do back to them. So basically, if my sister slapped me, I could slap her back, and mom wouldn't have to fear of us complaining every time we fought, right? Well, fast forward to when a neighbor boy is terrorizing me and my sister. We were probably 7 and 9 at the time. The boy was also 7, and he threw a 9-volt battery at us. I naturally threw it back at him. But since he was on the ground and I was on the porch, it hit him right on his eyebrow and left a cut. He, of course, ran to his mom crying, and she was upset. When my mom asked me why I did it, I just said, "You told me I could do anything other people did to me." And he threw the battery first? Needless to say, she modified that rule and told me it only applied to my sister. Story 89. 16 to 17 months old. Just would not walk to the car. It's an empty shopping center, middle of the day. Been there a million times and I'm over seeing the same bricks and leaves and gum stuck to the wall. Me. "Okay, honey, if you don't keep up, I'll just go to the car without you." Kid. "Bye-bye, Mom." Me, starting to regret abandonment fear as a good option, but also don't want to have empty threats, walks around the corner and waits. I hear doodling around and singing. Come back around, get a glance and a wave. Kid continues on. Cause gosh dang it, I wouldn't leave my kid alone. It was a crappy thing to even say, but my kid never believed it for a second, and has since then showed a very strong attachment. In case you don't know, a strong attachment often shows as a kid quickly being comfortable in a place that you bring them to or talk up, and they will leave your butt in a hot second to go play with some random thing because grown-ups always come back. And I have a deep, and I feel appropriate, guilt for using fear as a motivator. Why would I want my kids to be afraid of me or afraid I would disappear? Coming up with appropriate responses when some of their actions are so backcrap insane is hard. Story 90. Not me, but one of my mom's friend had a 12-year-old girl that fell into the wrong crowd. She started smoking and got really into tattoos. My mom's friend answer to it was to force her to smoke an entire carton of cigarettes and get a tattoo in the most painful place possible. To my mother's delight, as there was always a bit of rivalry about how each mother brought up their kids, she sat there and smoked all the cigarettes quite happily, and without even batting an eyelid, got a tattoo. If this was a Pokemon game, there would be a "not very effective" message popping up 300 times in a row right in front of her face. From then on, she became known as the cool girl that got a tattoo at 12 years old. You can imagine where she is now. Alright guys, thanks for hanging out and enjoying the tales of misfires and backfires of parent tragedies. If you guys have any stories that you would like to share, feel free to drop them down below in the comments. And as again, we will see you in the next one.